Hello, and welcome to a series which I am tentatively calling Thoughts per Chapter. It's different to a blurble reasoning because it's not me reading a reading a book for the first time and giving my first opinions on it. It's me reading and then giving my impressions on a chapter at a time, or maybe even passages at a time. I did a couple of blurble reasonings on the first few books in the Cirque de Freak saga of this whole Darren Shan vampire world, and people want more, and I've always felt guilty because I kind of fell off my reread, so I've decided to start again with this new way of doing things, starting with the prequels because this is a retrospective. I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with the prequels if you've never read these books. I don't think it would be a mistake, but I think it might be better. It's more interesting, I think, to go back and find out more about Larten Crepsley after the fact. But this is going to be a full spoiler series where we talk about the entire series as we go along. I won't be reading the book out loud because that would be piracy. Go and buy and read the book for yourself. And once again, this is recommended for people who have already read the series. So without further ado, let's begin Chapter 1. I do like, by the way, how just before Chapter 1 we do get Part 1, A Cobweb's a Treat Where You Come From, which is a quote which will stand out to anyone who has read the original books. I actually got treated to a preview of this chapter by Darren Shan himself in a book signing event that I went to, which was for Hell's Heroes. I'd not read Dark Calling yet, but I got Dark Calling and Hell's Heroes there. But he did a preview reading of this first chapter leading up to that moment, before he had actually announced to the world what the series was going to be, that he was going to be doing a prequel series, so that was exciting. And I vividly remember as well, he didn't tell us that it was an excerpt from a Larten Crepsley novel, so the whole "A Cobweb's a Treat Where You Come From" line was actually a revelation, and the crowd went wild, because of course we did. In that Q&A, I had asked him if he had any idea of where the story went after the end of Sons of Destiny, and if we would get some sort of story perspective from Harkat Mold or something. So I think that was before he read this excerpt, so that was funny. Or maybe it was after and I'm just not very imaginative. Anyway, sorry, I said I'll get on with Chapter 1. Let's get on with Chapter 1. The book opens with a line, "When Larten Crepsley awoke and yawned one grey Tuesday morning, he had no idea that by midday he would have become a killer." And I love that opening because obviously it immediately foreshadows to us what's about to happen. It doesn't exactly foreshadow, it straight up tells us, but it's this idea that you can wake up in an ordinary life and be swept out of it, even though it's just a standard Tuesday morning. It's also very retrospective from the outset, which is what this entire series is, of course, because we are prequeling this shit. We also get an image of his home, which both shows us the kind of class he lives in. You get the idea that he lives in poverty. He sleeps on a bed of straw. It also kind of sets a time period for us, with it being a bed of straw. And finally, it kind of foreshadows as well the fact that he's going to be sleeping in cold, dark places for his entire life, because that's kind of how his bedroom is described. Well, it's not even his bedroom, he doesn't have a bedroom, but you know what I mean. It's also fun to be introduced to this idea that he came from a large family. I don't know why, but I always kind of saw Larten Crepsley as an only child, but I guess that's what happens when you're 200 years old and you outlive your entire family. Although it would make sense that he goes back to his city of birth in the main series to quote-unquote, well, actually, paraphrase, unparaphrase, protect his kin. Like, he still sees the people of that city as his kin, and that's probably partially because he had so many brothers and sisters that, while he probably meant it more in the grander sense of this is where I came from, these are my people, it also probably literally means I have lots of descendants here. We're told that Larten woke up a few minutes before the rest of his brothers and sisters so that he could use the bedpan while everyone else was asleep. We immediately get this image of Larten as someone who has had to scrap for survival amongst his brothers and sisters and is quite cunning because of it. Also, as we get to this world where he's in the vampire clan, we're going to be talking a lot about the values of the vampire clan and how they value strength and hard living and all that kind of stuff. Larten kind of already was brought up in that kind of a way. The Horston is name dropped, and it's an immediate shock to the system of anyone who had read the mainline series, because the Horston is the name that Larten Crepsley goes by in the main series, and I have a lot of questions about if these are ideas that occurred to Darren as he decided to do the prequel series, or if these were ideas that he already had during the mainline series. Like, Verhorsten just sounds like a creepy vampire name, and it's passed off as a name that Larten Crepsley just went by, I think originally, like, back in, like, the 1800s or 1900s in Paris. But, like, here it's revealed to actually be, not his brother, right? Hang on, I'm still reading. But, like, an adoptive brother of sorts? A cousin of theirs. Okay, there we are. It's interesting how Larten's parents very much are portrayed as seeing their children as potential workers to bring income to the family. This seems to be very much a time when the poor working society are encouraged to breed and make lots of babies, so that those babies can actually work and get income enough for the family to live, which they wouldn't have otherwise, which I'm pretty sure probably happened throughout historical scenarios. Sorry if I'm stumbling over my words a little. It's been a long day. Also, can I just say we're like 2 pages in and I'm having a delightful time. It is a good time to be rereading some Darren Shan books. I haven't done this in a little while. I like that bread soaked in milk is a rare treat. It's also fun to contrast Larten's upbringing with Darren's. I did mention that it's probably only good to be listening to this if you are familiar with the series, but for those who may not be familiar with the series, Darren Shan is both the author and main character of the original vampire saga. From now on, when I talk about Darren the author, I will call him Darren the author. How about that? It's nice that Ver buys Larten's friendship immediately by sharing half of his treat, the bigger half of his treat with him. We get this kind of childhood idea of honor, and obviously honor is going to be a major theme throughout this entire series. Am I overanalyzing this? I'm probably overanalyzing this. Welcome to Thoughts Per Chapter, where I will absolutely be overanalyzing this. We very quickly get this image as well of Larten being quite the protective older brother, cousin, to Ver. Like, Ver is too weak to fend for himself all that well, so Larten steps in. I wonder if that will come up later. See, that wasn't overanalyzing, that was a perfectly accurate level of analyzing. Often in history, when it's taught in schools, it's taught, like, in a way to shock kids, from, like, how things used to be versus how things are now. They'll talk about things like how hygiene was different, how standards were different, and it's no different here. We're told that Larten's mother was an orderly woman, and that she did the family laundry every second Sunday, and that Larten is basically getting dressed wearing what he slept in below what he's getting dressed into. It's meant to be very like, oh, that's gross, but back then it was normal. Also, while this is a very historical take on a family mourning, it does, hygiene stuff aside, it does bring to mind memories of getting up super early for school as a kid and like wiping the sleep dust out of your eyes, and like your siblings are getting ready for school and you're all like half asleep trying to get ready for the day. It evokes that as well for sure. Larten's sister finished on a bedpan. Before his youngest brother could claim it, Larten darted across the room, snatched it and passed it to Ver, careful not to spill the contents. Lovely. Always lovely to get that extra bit of grisly detail from Darren the author. There is a passage here which I'm not sure needs to be here about how Larten sticks up for Ver. I feel like we've already been shown that, but we are told that just to back that up. There was never much to eat, and those who grabbed first got the most. Again, we're very much reinforcing this idea of a society where you have to scrap to survive, even within your own home. Larten's mother terrifies me. She would have made an amazing vampire. So we get to this idea that where Larten and Ver work, they get their hair dyed based according to their role. So Larten and Ver's are a deep orange hair dye, which is pretty dystopian. It evokes this idea of how sheep get marked for slaughter, like, you know, on their wool. It's this idea that your job is your identity. It's all you are good for in this world. It is what you will be recognized as. I'm also wondering if it's ever actually happened that way in history. I'm assuming, you know, Darren's done more research on this stuff than I have. It is a fun way to explain Larten's deep orange hair. I always just kind of assumed he was ginger, but no, apparently some Victorian era taskmaster forced him to dye his hair orange. We also get told that some of the dye falls out of his hair when he's drinking from the water barrel and makes orange swirls in the water, and I'm thinking that's not healthy. I don't know what they use as hair dye back then, but I feel like it's not healthy to have that swimming around in your water barrel. No wonder people used to get ill back then. The dye, by the way, is not described as being a painless process. It is caked into his scalp, which sounds painful. If I remember right, later on we also get a description of it actually being applied to him, which sounds very painful indeed. Yeah, there's this interesting exchange between Larten and Ver, where Ver thinks they're going to be late because their heads are going to be daubed again today. They're going to be dyed again, basically. And it seems like getting your hair dyed is this cruel act which happens early, but the kids will get screamed at for turning up late even though they're not forewarned about it happening, which is just one act of injustice against the boys we will be seeing throughout the story. Kraz is mentioned, which isn't a particularly pleasant sounding name, as this kind of taskmaster figure, their boss basically. It's mentioned that Ver has a weird knack for being able to figure out which days they're going to get their hair dyed again. And nothing really comes of this, but it's just a nice little way of giving him a little bit more character, I guess. Like, he's kind of got this sixth sense about him. That's pretty neat. And then the chapter ends with this line, "Then let's go," Larten sniffed, and the two boys, neither yet a teen, headed off to work, which just reminds us that this is not an era in which workers have rights, children have rights, the world is in a decent place in terms of society. It's never mentioned what country Larten Crepsley comes from. I believe it's speculated he comes from some Central European country, but from these opening chapters and Birth of a Killer, and the artwork on the front based on what he's wearing as well, I've always been more under the impression that he came from a Victorian era London style area. But then I don't know much about what was happening in Germany during that time, so maybe same time period, different country. Who knows? I do remember, one last little thing before we go, I do remember thinking that when this series was announced, I was wondering if we were ever going to get an explanation as to why he's called Crepsley, because Crepsley seemed like a name he took on, but I guess Crepsley's just his name. Anyway, that's gonna do it. I hope you enjoyed my time reading through the first chapter of Birth of a Killer. Please let me know if you did down below, it helps immensely with the channel. Leave a like if you liked the video, subscribe for more. I don't know how often I'm going to be doing these yet. It doesn't seem like it would take too long to make this kind of video, and I did have a brilliant time doing it, so probably look out for more soon. And yeah, this is a thing that I want to do.